June 14, 1944. 8 days after D-Day, Villers-Bocage, Normandy, France. The Tiger tank sat motionless in the morning mist, its massive hull canted at an angle in the cratered street. Smoke still rose from the engine compartment, thin and black against the grey Norman sky. The beast had finally stopped. Its reign of terror ended not by superior firepower, but by a track blown off in a minefield, followed by concentrated fire from 3 Sherman tanks that had caught it immobilized. Lieutenant James Murphy of the U.S. Army's Ordnance Technical Intelligence Team approached cautiously, his boots crunching on shattered glass and spent shell casings. Around him, Villers-Bocage looked like the end of the world. Buildings reduced to skeletal walls, vehicles burning, the debris of battle scattered across cobblestones. The town had been taken, lost and retaken in 72 hours of brutal fighting. "Sir, you sure this is safe?" Corporal Eddie Vasquez followed close behind, his carbine held ready. "Could still be booby-trapped. Nothing safe in Normandy, Eddie, but we need to see inside this thing." Murphy circled the Tiger, running his hand along the armour plating. 56 tons of German engineering, the most feared tank on the battlefield. Shermans called them death traps. You needed 5 Shermans to kill 1 Tiger, and 4 of those 5 wouldn't be going home. The mathematics of armoured warfare were brutally simple. German tanks had thicker armour and bigger guns. American tanks were faster and more numerous. The exchange rate favoured the Germans. Always. Murphy climbed onto the Tiger's hull, peering into the commander's cupola. The interior was a charnel house. The crew had died when a Sherman 75mm round had finally found a weak spot and penetrated, sending white-hot fragments ricocheting through the fighting compartment. He forced himself not to look at the bodies, focusing instead on the damage pattern. "Multiple hits on the frontal armour," he called down to Vasquez, who was taking notes. "All deflected. Scarring here suggests, Jesus, at least 15 impacts. They pounded this thing and nothing got through." "Then how'd they kill it?" "Good question." Murphy slid down, moved to examine the side armour. More impacts, more deflections. The Tiger's armour was sloped, angled to maximise effective thickness. Even the relatively weak 75mm guns on American Shermans should have penetrated at close range, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Then he saw it. Near the turret ring, where the rotating turret met the hull, a series of weld marks ran in a continuous line. Standard construction technique. The turret had to be attached somehow. But one of the welds showed something unusual, a crack. Not from battle damage, but from stress. The metal around it was discoloured, suggesting heat damage not from external fire, but from the welding process itself. Murphy pulled out a small magnifying glass, examining the weld more closely. The crack extended into the base armour, creating a hairline fracture barely visible to the naked eye. "Eddie, come here, look at this." Vasquez climbed up beside him, squinted at the weld. "Looks like a manufacturing defect, sir. Bad welding job. Or rushed welding job. Look at the pattern. It's consistent all along this seam. Not just one bad weld, but systematic." Murphy's mind raced. The Germans are producing these Tigers as fast as they can. What if they're cutting corners on quality control? What if this isn't an isolated defect? "You think all Tigers have this problem?" "I think we need to find out." Captain Richard Morrison arrived an hour later, bringing with him Major Hastings from the British Tank Research Department. Hastings was a middle-aged engineer who'd designed tank armour before the war, his academic credentials lending weight to his analysis. "Show me what you found, Lieutenant," Hastings said, all business. Murphy guided him through his observations, the multiple deflected hits, the weld patterns, the stress fractures near the turret ring. Hastings examined everything with meticulous care, taking measurements, making sketches, running his fingers along the welds like a doctor examining a patient. "Fascinating," he murmured. "The armour itself is excellent, face-hardened steel, proper thickness, good angles. But these welds," he pulled out a small tool, scraped at the metal. "They've used substandard technique here, probably to speed production. The heat from welding has created what we call heat-affected zones, areas where the metal's crystalline structure has been compromised. In English, Major, Morrison asked. The armour is strong, but the welds connecting it are weak. It's like building a castle with strong walls but weak mortar. Hit it in the right spot and the whole thing comes apart. Murphy felt excitement building. The turret ring, if we concentrate fire there, the structural integrity could fail, Hastings finished. The turret might jam, rendering the gun inoperable. Or better yet, a penetrating hit at the weld joint could send fragments into the fighting compartment. He stood, looking at the dead tiger with new appreciation. Gentlemen, this might be exactly what we've been looking for. Over the next 3 days, Murphy's team examined every destroyed or abandoned German tank they could find. Tigers, Panthers, even the older Panzer IVs. The pattern repeated itself. Superior armour, inferior welds. The Germans' rush to produce tanks in quantity was creating a systematic weakness. On June the 17th, Murphy found himself in a tent at British Second Army headquarters, presenting his findings to a room full of senior officers. Maps covered the walls, showing the grinding advance through Normandy, each kilometre bought with blood and burning metal. The vulnerability is most pronounced on the Tiger and Panther models, Murphy explained, using a pointer to indicate areas on a technical diagram. The turret ring weld, specifically. The Germans are using electric arc welding under rushed conditions, creating heat-affected zones approximately 2 to 3 centimetres wide along the entire circumference. A British colonel leaned forward. And you're certain this is consistent across multiple vehicles? We've examined 17 destroyed German tanks, sir. 14 showed the same defect. The 3 that didn't were older models probably built before Germany accelerated production. Major Hastings added his analysis. The implications are significant. Currently, our doctrine calls for flanking manoeuvres to hit the thinner side armour. But if we can train gunners to target the turret ring specifically, we can achieve kills from the front. That changes everything. Targeting a weld seam in combat, the colonel sounded sceptical. That's precision shooting under combat conditions, gentlemen. Tank gunners aren't snipers. No, sir, Murphy agreed, but they're trained professionals. And if the choice is between bouncing rounds off frontal armour until you're killed or aiming for a specific weak point, I think they'll take the weak point. The room fell silent as the officers considered this. Everyone present had lost men to German tanks. Everyone had seen Shermans brew up, the terrible euphemism for a tank catching fire and cooking its crew alive. Any edge, any advantage was worth pursuing. A Brigadier General Murphy didn't recognise spoke up. What do you need, Lieutenant? Permission to brief frontline tank units, sir. Gun camera footage from successful kills targeting the turret ring. A training program to teach gunners how to identify and aim for the weak point. And most importantly, field testing to confirm the theory under combat conditions. You'll have it, all of it. The General looked around the room. Gentlemen, if this pans out, it could save hundreds of Allied lives and knock out God knows how many German tanks. We implement this immediately. Captain Morrison, coordinate with the Lieutenant. I want briefings going out to every tank unit in Normandy within 48 hours. Morrison nodded sharply. Yes, sir. As the meeting broke up, Hastings pulled Murphy aside. You realise what you've found, don't you? The Germans built the best tanks in the world, but they built them too quickly. Hubris and desperation combined. They thought superior design would overcome manufacturing shortcuts. Will this really work? Murphy asked quietly. Or are we sending men out with false hope? There's only one way to find out. Hastings clapped him on the shoulder. But I've been studying armour all my life, Lieutenant. The math checks out. The metallurgy checks out. Whether our tankers can exploit it under fire, that's the question war will answer. That night, Murphy sat in his tent writing a report that would be distributed throughout Allied armoured forces. Outside, He could hear the rumble of tanks moving up to the front, the constant background noise of war. Somewhere out there, Sherman crews were bedding down in their tanks, maybe writing letters home, maybe just trying to sleep despite the fear of facing tigers in the morning. Tomorrow, some of them would get a new set of instructions. Aim here, hit this spot. You have a chance now. Murphy hoped to God he was right, because if he was wrong, he'd be sending men to their deaths based on a theory built on examining weld seams in a destroyed tank. But the evidence was there. The weakness was real. Now came the hard part, turning intelligence into action, theory into practice, hope into survival. The war would be the ultimate test, and testing would begin tomorrow. June 18th, 1944. British Second Army Mobile Laboratory, 6 kilometres behind the front lines. The captured Panther tank arrived on a flatbed trailer just after dawn, still smouldering from the battle that had disabled it. Technical Sergeant William Chen of the US Army Metallurgical Section watched as a crane carefully lowered the 45-ton monster onto wooden blocks in the makeshift analysis yard. Unlike the Tiger Murphy had examined, this one was relatively intact. The crew had bailed out after an engine fire, leaving the vehicle abandoned but structurally sound. Perfect for what Chen needed to do. "Gentlemen, meet your patient," said Major Hastings, gesturing to the Panther like a surgeon presenting a cadaver. Around them stood a mixed team of American and British engineers, metallurgists and intelligence officers, men pulled from universities and research labs, now wearing uniforms and working in muddy fields instead of clean laboratories. Chen approached the tank with a mixture of professional curiosity and personal fear. He'd seen what these things could do. 2 days ago, a single Panther had destroyed 7 Shermans before finally being knocked out. The mathematics were unsustainable. At this rate, the Allies would run out of tanks before the Germans did. "Sergeant Chen, you're leading the metallurgical analysis," Hastings said. "I want to know everything about these welds. Chemical composition, heat treatment, structural integrity, failure points, everything." "Yes, sir." Chen set down his equipment case, an incongruous collection of precision instruments that looked absurdly delicate next to the brutal mass of the Panther. "I'll need to take samples. That means cutting into the armour. Do what you need to do. This tank is worth more to us as data than as scrap metal." Over the next 6 hours, Chen and his team worked with methodical precision. Using portable spectrometers, hardness testers, and careful drilling equipment, they analysed the armour composition and the weld patterns that joined the massive plates together. The base armour was impressive. Chen had to grudgingly admit that German metallurgy was first-rate. High-quality steel, properly hardened, with a crystalline structure that would deflect or absorb tremendous impact energy. The Germans knew their materials science, but the welds told a different story. "Major, you need to see this," Chen called out, peering through a microscope at a cross-section sample he'd carefully extracted from the turret ring area. Hastings joined him, looking through the optical device at the magnified metal structure. What he saw made him draw a sharp breath. The weld metal showed a classic case of rapid cooling. The crystalline structure was coarse and irregular, full of microscopic voids and inclusions. Worse, the heat-affected zone extended nearly 4 centimetres into the base armour on either side of the weld, creating a band of compromised metal all the way around the turret ring. "They welded this hot and fast," Chen explained, pointing to the telltale patterns. "Electric arc welding, probably, with insufficient preheating and post-weld heat treatment. The base metal cooled too quickly, creating internal stresses and brittleness. It's metallurgy 101, what you're not supposed to do." "But why?" Hastings asked. "The Germans aren't amateurs. They know proper welding technique." "Time, sir. Proper welding of armour this thick would require preheating the metal to 300 degrees Celsius, welding in multiple passes with controlled cooling, then post-weld heat treatment. That takes days. This," he gestured at the sample, "this was done in hours, maybe a single day for the entire turret ring." A British captain named Thompson, who'd been examining the tank's production markings, spoke up. "According to the hull numbers, this Panther was built in April 1944, 2 months ago. The factory stamp indicates it came from the Mann facility in Nuremberg." "Nuremberg's been hit by strategic bombing," Hastings noted, multiple raids. They're probably working with damaged facilities, rushed production schedules, maybe even forced labour that doesn't have proper training. Chen nodded slowly, understanding dawning. They're in a race. They know we're coming, know we outnumber them in tanks and everything else. So they're pushing production to the limit, cutting every corner they can. Superior design, inferior execution. Can we exploit it? Hastings asked bluntly. Absolutely. Chen pulled out a diagram he'd been sketching. The heat-affected zone creates a ring of brittleness around the entire turret. Hit it with sufficient force at the right angle, and you'll either jam the turret, making the gun inoperable, or, if you're lucky, penetrate into the fighting compartment. The weld itself is the weakest point, but the compromised armour on either side is also vulnerable. Another engineer, a British lieutenant named Davies who specialised in ballistics, chimed in. I've been calculating penetration mechanics. A 75mm armour-piercing round from a Sherman at ranges under 800 metres should have sufficient kinetic energy to exploit this weakness. At the right angle, perpendicular to the weld seam, we're looking at probable penetration. Should have? Hastings raised an eyebrow. I need better than should have, Lieutenant. Then we test it, sir. Set up a firing range, use captured German armour, and see what happens when we aim specifically for the turret ring versus standard centre mass targeting. By noon, they'd moved one of the captured tank hulls to a makeshift proving ground, a cleared field with earthen berms for safety. A Sherman tank from the 2nd Armoured Division had been volunteered for the test, its crew both curious and sceptical about the whole operation. The Sherman's commander, a captain named Rodriguez, stood with his crew near their tank. You're telling me we should aim for a weld seam instead of the centre of the target. That goes against everything we've been taught. It goes against everything everyone's been taught, Hastings agreed. But the centre of the target is the strongest part. Solid armour plate, maximum thickness. The turret ring is structurally weaker. We need to know if it's weak enough to matter. They set up the test carefully. The Panther hull was positioned at varying ranges, 800 metres, 600 metres, 400 metres. Rodriguez's gunner, a young corporal from Texas named Harris, would take the shots. First round, 800 metres, centre mass, Hastings called out. The Sherman's 75mm gun barked, the shell crossing the distance in a flat arc. It struck the Panther's frontal armour with a shower of sparks and a sound like a massive bell being struck. When the smoke cleared, they could see the impact point, a deep scar in the armour, but no penetration. Deflection, Davies noted, checking through binoculars. As expected at that range and angle. Second round, same range, target the turret ring. Harris adjusted his aim, compensating for the smaller target. The gun fired again. This time the impact was different, a sharper crack, and when they examined the target afar, they found the shell had struck within centimetres of the weld seam. The armour showed a deep crater, with visible cracking radiating outward. Structural damage, Chen called out, examining the impact site. The weld held but barely. Look at this cracking pattern. That's the heat-affected zone failing. One more hit in the same spot would probably do it. They repeated the test at closer ranges. At 600 metres, a direct hit on the turret ring produced dramatic results. The shell punched through the compromised weld, sending fragments into the interior of the turret. At 400 metres, even a glancing hit caused the turret to jam, the force of impact warping the ring enough that rotation became impossible. Rodriguez stared at the results, his scepticism fading. Son of a bitch, it actually works. It works, Hastings confirmed. The question is whether gunners can hit such a specific target under combat conditions. That's a much smaller aim point than centre mass. Harris, the gunner, spoke up. Sir, with respect, we're already trying for specific hits. Nobody shoots at the centre of a tiger and expects to penetrate. We aim for vision ports, gun mantlets, anywhere that might be weaker. This is just giving us a better target to aim for. And if you miss? Same result as missing anywhere else. We take another shot and hope we live long enough to get it right. The brutal honesty of that statement hung in the air. Tank warfare in Normandy was a desperate business. Shermans were outgunned and out-armoured. Their only advantages were numbers, speed, and the courage of their crews. Now, potentially, they had one more advantage: knowledge. By evening, Chen had compiled a comprehensive technical report. The document included metallurgical analysis, ballistic test results, detailed diagrams showing the exact location of weak points on Tigers, Panthers, and Panzer IVs. He'd even included recommendations for optimal engagement ranges and angles of attack. "This goes out tonight," Hastings said, reviewing the report. "Every tank unit in Normandy gets a copy. We're also preparing a simplified field manual, one-page guide with diagrams that gunners can keep in their tanks." "What about the Germans?" Thompson asked. "Once we start exploiting this systematically, they'll figure out what we're doing. They'll fix the problem in new production." "Let them," Hastings replied. "That takes time, retooling factories, changing production processes, retrofitting existing vehicles. Meanwhile, we kill every tank they send against us with faulty welds. War isn't about perfect solutions, Captain. It's about exploiting every advantage before the enemy can respond." Murphy arrived that evening with more data. His team had examined 32 destroyed or captured German tanks across the Normandy front. 28 showed the same welding defects. The 4 that didn't were all older vehicles, built before 1944. "It's systematic," Murphy reported to the assembled officers. "Every tank built since they ramped up production shows this problem. That's hundreds of vehicles in Normandy alone, thousands across all fronts." "Then we teach every Allied tanker how to kill them," said the Brigadier General who'd authorised the investigation. He'd arrived to personally review the findings, his interest reflecting the importance placed on anything that might tip the scales in armoured combat. "Sir, I've prepared a training protocol," Murphy said, unfurling a poster-sized diagram. "Visual identification of the turret ring from various angles, range estimation, lead calculations for moving targets. We can train gunners in a day, maybe less for experienced crews." The General studied the diagram. "How confident are you in this, Lieutenant?" Murphy thought about the tests, the metallurgical analysis, the evidence from 32 tanks. He thought about Rodriguez's crew, who'd gone from scepticism to belief in the course of an afternoon shooting. "Sir, I can't promise it'll work every time. Combat conditions, moving targets, enemy fire. There are too many variables. But it gives our crews a fighting chance they didn't have before. That's worth something." "It's worth everything," the General said quietly. "Implement it. I want briefings going out to every armoured unit tonight. Training begins tomorrow. And gentlemen," he looked around at the assembled officers and engineers, "this stays classified as long as possible. The longer it takes the Germans to figure out we know about this, the more of their tanks we can destroy." That night, staff cars and dispatch riders fanned out across the Normandy front, carrying copies of the technical report and simplified field guides. In tank parks and assembly areas, crews gathered around flashlights to study diagrams, memorising the silhouettes of German tanks and the precise locations of their vulnerabilities. Chen sat in his tent, updating his notes, when Murphy stopped by. "Hell of a day," Murphy said, sitting heavily on a camp stool. "You found it first," Chen replied. "That tiger in WWII. I just confirmed what you suspected. Teamwork. You gave me the science to back up a hunch." Murphy pulled out a flask, took a drink, offered it to Chen, who declined. "You think this'll make a difference? Really make a difference?" Chen considered the question. The Germans made the best tanks in the world, but they made them too fast, under too much pressure. That's their fatal flaw, not just in the armour, but in their whole approach. They tried to achieve perfection through brute force and superior design. We're achieving good enough through numbers and adaptation. Good enough wins wars? In the long run, yes, because good enough can be mass-produced, taught to ordinary soldiers, implemented quickly. Perfection takes time Germany doesn't have. Chen closed his notebook. Tomorrow, tank crews will go into battle with information they didn't have yesterday. Some of them will survive because of it. That's all we can do. Give them every possible advantage and hope it's enough. Outside, the sound of artillery rumbled in the distance, the constant percussion of war. Somewhere out there, German tanks were moving into position, unaware that their armour had been compromised not by Allied firepower, but by their own nation's desperate rush to produce weapons faster than they could be destroyed. The intelligence was gathered. The analysis was complete. The training was beginning. Now came the test that mattered, not in controlled conditions on a firing range, but in the chaos of combat, where men would live or die based on whether a gunner could hit a weld seam while shells exploded around him and death approached at 50 kilometres per hour. The science was done. The war would provide the final examination. June 20th, 1944, 2 kilometres south of Caen, Normandy. Staff Sergeant Mike Donovan had been a tank commander for 18 months, and in that time he'd learned one fundamental truth. When you saw a German heavy tank, you ran, you didn't engage, you didn't play hero, you got the hell out of the kill zone and called for artillery or air support. Shermans versus Tigers was suicide, plain and simple. But now, sitting in the commander's cupola of his M4 A1 Sherman, affectionately called Denver Dolly by his crew, Donovan studied a mimeographed sheet of paper that claimed to change everything. The paper showed a detailed diagram of a Panther tank with a specific area circled, the turret ring, where the rotating turret met the hull. Aim here, the instructions read. Structural weakness from manufacturing defects. Effective range 800 metres or less. Perpendicular angle preferred. Multiple its increased probability of kill or mission kill. His gunner, Corporal Tommy Sullivan, a machinist from Detroit who could put 5 rounds through the same hole at 1,000 yards if you gave him time, peered at the diagram sceptically. Sarge, this is saying we should aim for a target the size of a dinner plate on a moving tank while he's trying to kill us with a gun that can punch through our armour from a mile away. You believe this? I believe some smart guys in the rear tested it and said it works, Donovan replied. He didn't mention his own doubts. Leadership meant projecting confidence even when you had none. We got briefed yesterday. They showed us footage from the test fires. The weak point is real. Test fires on a stationary target ain't combat, pointed out Private First Class Jimmy Reese, the loader, who at 19 was the youngest member of the crew. Nothing's like combat until you're in it, said Corporal Eddie Walsh, the driver, his voice muffled from the driving position. Question is, we going to try this or keep doing what we've been doing? What they'd been doing was dying. Donovan's company had started with 14 Shermans when they landed at Normandy. They were down to 9, and 2 of those were damaged and awaiting repair. Every loss had been to German armour, Panthers, Tigers or the newer Panzer IVs with long 75mm guns. We're going to try it, Donovan decided. Next engagement, we aim for the turret ring first. If it doesn't work, we do it the old way. Flank if we can, run if we can't. He didn't have to wait long to test the theory. At 14:30 hours, their platoon, 4 Shermans in a standard formation, was advancing through the Bocage country south of Caen when Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. All Charlie units, contact front. Heavy armour, approximately 600 metres, hold down position behind the hedgerow. Looks like a Panther. All units halt and take cover. Donovan's heart rate spiked. A hull-down Panther was a nightmare scenario. Only the turret exposed, presenting minimal target area, while its 75mm gun could reach out and kill you from well beyond your effective range. Through his periscope, he could see it now, the distinctive boxy turret of a Panther positioned behind the thick Norman hedgerow with only the gun and upper turret visible. Smart positioning. The German commander knew his business. All units, withdraw to... Morrison started to order, then stopped. Wait one. Donovan knew what the lieutenant was thinking. This was the moment. They could run, follow doctrine, call for support, or they could try something new. Charlie 2-6, Charlie 2-3, Morrison's voice came back, addressing Donovan's tank and one other. You two read that technical bulletin from yesterday? Affirmative, 2-6. We're going to test it. Take positions left and right, get angles on that turret ring. 2-2 and 2-4 will provide covering fire, aim for his vision ports, keep him buttoned up. On my mark. Donovan felt his crew tense. Sullivan was already adjusting his sight, calculating range and deflection. Reese had a round in the chamber, another ready in his hands. Walsh's hands hovered over the controls, ready to move. Sullivan, you see that turret ring? Donovan asked. I see it, Sarge. Range at 580 metres. Slight angle, maybe 15 degrees off perpendicular. Not ideal, but doable. You can hit it? I can hit it. Whether it'll do anything is another question. The radio crackled. All Charlie units, execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Mark. Walsh gunned the engine and Denver Dolly lurched forward, racing to the left to get a better angle. Simultaneously, Charlie 2-3 moved right. The other two Shermans opened fire, their 75mm rounds cracking across the distance to hammer the Panther's frontal armour and turret front. Unlikely to penetrate, but forcing the German crew to button up and limiting their visibility. The Panther's gun swung toward them, and Donovan felt his stomach drop. They had seconds, maybe less. Target acquired, Sullivan said, his voice preternaturally calm. Turret ring, centre mass. Fire! The Sherman rocked backward as the 75mm gun fired. Through the smoke and dust, Donovan saw the tracer arc across the hedgerow-divided field. The impact was obscured by the Panther's position, but he saw sparks. Hit! He called. Reload, same target. Up! Reese shouted, slamming another round into the breech. The Panther's gun was still tracking them. Any second now. Sullivan fired again. This time Donovan saw it clearly. The round struck directly at the junction of turret and hull. The impact created a shower of sparks and fragments different from a simple deflection. The Panther's turret jerked, started to traverse, then stopped. Stuck. We jammed him, Donovan shouted into the radio. Target immobile. Turret appears jammed. Charlie 2-3's gun barked, their round hitting the same area. This time, smoke began pouring from the turret ring. Not the thick black smoke of burning fuel, but grey smoke suggesting electrical fire or hydraulic fluid. The Panther's engine roared to life, the tank beginning to back away from its position. Turret still frozen, gun pointing uselessly at an angle, it was trying to retreat. Don't let him go, Morrison ordered. Keep firing. Sullivan and the gunner in 2-3 kept hammering the crippled Panther. On the fourth or fifth hit, Donovan lost count in the chaos. There was a different kind of flash. The round had penetrated, punching through the compromised weld and into the fighting compartment. The Panther stopped moving. Hatches popped open and German crewmen bailed out, running for cover as smoke poured from their disabled tank. For a moment, there was stunned silence over the radio net. Then Morrison's voice, shaky with adrenaline and something like disbelief. Did that actually work? It worked, Donovan confirmed, hardly believing it himself. They'd engaged a Panther head-on, something that usually meant death, and won. Not through superior armour or firepower, but through knowledge, through aiming at a specific weakness that the German crew probably didn't even know existed. All units, advance and secure the area. Charlie 2-6, excellent shooting. That evening, back at the company assembly area, Donovan's crew gathered around their Sherman, still processing what had happened. Other crews clustered around, wanting to hear the story firsthand. You really aimed for the turret ring? Asked a corporal from another platoon. Deliberately. Following the technical bulletin, Donovan confirmed. Second shot jammed his turret. Fourth or fifth got penetration. Holy shit, the corporal looked at his own gunner. You hear that, Billy? Maybe this ain't bullshit after all. Captain Richards, the company commander, arrived with Lieutenant Morrison. Sergeant Donovan, I need a detailed after-action report. Range, angle, number of rounds fired, observed effects. Everything. Yes, sir. And Corporal Sullivan, Richards turned to the gunner. Excellent work. That's the kind of shooting that saves lives. Sullivan nodded, still looking a bit dazed. Sir, I've been a gunner for 10 months. I've fired maybe 60 rounds in combat. Never thought I'd knock out a Panther head-on. You might knock out more, Richards said, because as of tonight, we're implementing this as standard doctrine for the company. Every crew studies the technical bulletin. Every gunner practices identifying the turret ring from various angles. We drill it until it's automatic. Over the next week, word spread through the 2nd Armoured Division. Donovan's kill was the first confirmed instance of exploiting the turret ring weakness in direct combat, but it wasn't the last. On June 22nd, a platoon from Baker Company engaged 3 Panthers near Tilly-sur-Seulles. Using the new tactics, multiple tanks concentrating fire on turret rings rather than attempting to flank, they destroyed 1 Panther and forced the other 2 to withdraw with jammed turrets. Baker Company lost no tanks in the engagement. On June 24th, a lone Sherman commanded by Sergeant Harold Chen, no relation to the metallurgist, encountered a Tiger tank at close range in a Norman village. Following doctrine, Chen's gunner targeted the turret ring from less than 200 metres. 3 rounds fired in rapid succession penetrated the weld, killing the Tiger crew and leaving the massive tank blocking the street, its gun still pointing harmlessly skyward. But it didn't always work. On June 26th, Able Company's 3rd Platoon engaged a group of Panthers in open terrain. The lead Sherman, commanded by Staff Sergeant Robert Miller, attempted the turret ring shot from 900 metres, beyond the recommended effective range. The round deflected and the Panthers' return fire penetrated Miller's Sherman, killing him and his crew instantly. The lesson was brutal but clear. The weakness was real, but it wasn't magic. Range, angle and accuracy still mattered. A poorly executed shot at the turret ring was no better than a poorly executed shot anywhere else. Lieutenant Morrison called a platoon meeting after Miller's death. "I know some of you are thinking this new doctrine got Miller killed," he said, looking at his assembled tank commanders. "That's not what happened. What killed Miller was engaging at too long a range against a dug-in target. The turret ring weakness doesn't change the fundamentals. We still need to close distance. We still need good angles. We still need to shoot straight. It just gives us a better target when we do everything else right." Donovan spoke up. "Sir, should we be sharing what we've learned? With other divisions, I mean. The more crews that know about this, the more German tanks we kill." "It's already happening," Morrison replied. "The division intelligence section is compiling after-action reports from every successful engagement. They're creating a revised field manual with actual combat examples, not just test range data. By next week, every American and British tank unit in Normandy will have access to the information." "What about the Germans?" asked another tank commander. "They got to be noticing that we're all shooting at the same spot." Morrison nodded grimly. "German tank recovery crews are probably already examining damaged vehicles, figuring out what we're doing. Some engineer in a German factory is probably getting an urgent message right now to fix the welding problem. But that takes time to change production procedures, time to retrofit existing tanks, time to get the improved vehicles to the front. Meanwhile, we exploit this advantage for all it's worth." Private Rees, who'd been quiet, spoke up. "Sir, how many German tanks in Normandy have this weakness?" "Intelligence estimates several hundred Panthers and Tigers, plus unknown numbers of other models. Not all of them show the defect, but most do." "So we might actually have a chance now, like a real chance." Morrison smiled thinly. "We always had a chance, Rees. We outnumber them. We have better logistics, better air support, more replacements. But yeah, this makes the odds a hell of a lot better. It means when we run into a Panther, we don't automatically assume we're dead. We assume we have a job to do, and now we know how to do it." That night, Donovan sat on the engine deck of Denver Dolly, cleaning his .45 pistol and thinking about the war. They'd been fighting for 2 weeks since landing at Normandy. 2 weeks of brutal hedgerow combat, of ambushes and counter-ambushes, of watching friends die and tanks burn. But something had changed. For the first time since encountering German heavy armour, American tank crews weren't just surviving through luck and numbers, they were winning through knowledge, through exploiting a weakness that the Germans probably didn't even realise they'd built into their vaunted superweapons. Sullivan climbed up beside him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thinking about Miller?" "Yeah, good man, experienced crew. He pushed the range too far. Could have happened to any of us." "Could still happen to us," Donovan said. "This ain't a miracle cure, it's just a better way to fight." "Better's good enough." Sullivan sipped his coffee. "I did some math earlier. Before we learned about the turret ring, I figured my odds of surviving the war were maybe 30%. Now, maybe 50-50. I'll take those odds." Donovan looked at his gunner, 22 years old, machinist's precision in his hands, steady under fire. "You planning to make it home, Sullivan?" "Planning on it, Sarge. Got a girl in Detroit. Promised her I'd come back and we'd open a garage together, fix cars instead of killing tanks. Sounds like a good plan. You? Same plan. Different girl, different city, but same basic idea. Survive this, go home, try to forget what it was like to be scared every single day. They sat in companionable silence, drinking bad coffee and listening to the distant rumble of artillery. Tomorrow they'd go back to war. Tomorrow they'd put their lives on the line again, test their luck and skill against German steel and explosive shells. But tomorrow they'd do it with knowledge their predecessors hadn't possessed. They'd do it knowing exactly where to aim, exactly what to hit, exactly how to kill the monsters that had haunted them since the Bocage fighting began. It wasn't much, but in war, small advantages could mean the difference between a burning wreck and making it home to Detroit, between dying in a Norman field and opening that garage with the girl who waited. One welding defect, one technical bulletin, one new way of fighting. Sometimes that was all it took to change everything. July 8th, 1944. Allied Armoured Tactics Conference, Montgomery's headquarters. Colonel David Patterson of the US 3rd Armoured Division stood before a room packed with Allied armour commanders, intelligence officers and tactical planners. Behind him, a large board displayed statistics that would have seemed impossible just 3 weeks earlier. "Gentlemen, the numbers speak for themselves," Patterson said, tapping the board with his pointer. Prior to June 20th, our kill-to-loss ratio against German heavy armour was roughly 1-4. For every Panther or Tiger we destroyed, we lost 4 Shermans. As of July 5th, that ratio has improved to 1-1.3. In some engagements, we're actually achieving favourable exchange rates. A British brigadier leaned forward. "You're attributing this entirely to the turret ring vulnerability?" "Not entirely, sir. We've also improved our combined arms tactics, our artillery coordination is better, and we're getting more effective air support. But the turret ring exploitation is a significant factor. We've documented 47 confirmed kills of Panthers and Tigers where the fatal hit struck the turret ring area. That's 47 heavy tanks that would likely still be operational if we were using conventional targeting." Major Hastings, now a fixture at these conferences, added his analysis. "We've also achieved numerous mission kills, tanks disabled but not destroyed, jammed turrets, damaged traverse mechanisms, fires in the fighting compartment that forced crew abandonment. A disabled tank is almost as good as a destroyed one from a tactical perspective." Patterson flipped to the next chart, showing a breakdown by engagement type. "What's particularly interesting is how crews are adapting the basic concept. We're seeing tactical innovation at the platoon and company level." He pointed to a specific after-action report. First Lieutenant James Parker, commanding a platoon of 76mm equipped Shermans, developed what he calls hammer and anvil tactics. 2 tanks engage from the front, targeting the turret ring to fix the enemy in place and potentially jam the turret. The remaining tanks flank at high speed and engage the thinner side armour. Result: 6 Panthers destroyed in 3 engagements with 0 friendly losses. "The 76mm guns help," someone noted. The newer Sherman variant mounted a more powerful gun with better penetration. "They do," Patterson agreed. "But we're also seeing 75mm equipped tanks achieve success using similar tactics. It's about thinking differently, using the knowledge of the weak point to create tactical opportunities we didn't have before." A Canadian major raised his hand. "What about tank destroyers? Are they implementing this as well?" "Extensively. The M10 and M18 tank destroyer battalions have adopted turret ring targeting as primary doctrine when engaging heavy armour. Their higher velocity guns are particularly effective. We've documented kills at ranges exceeding 1,200 metres. Patterson smiled slightly. One M18 commander reported knocking out a Tiger at 1,400 metres with a turret ring hit. The German crew probably never knew what killed them. The conference continued for 3 hours, with officers from various units sharing lessons learned, failures analysed, successes celebrated. What emerged was a picture of rapid tactical evolution driven by a single piece of intelligence. British tank commanders reported similar success rates. A Cromwell tank platoon had engaged a company of Panthers near Caen, using their superior speed to get flanking positions while lead tanks targeted turret rings from the front. 3 Panthers destroyed, 2 disabled, 0 British losses. Even the traditionally cautious British armour doctrine was adapting. Lieutenant Colonel James Weaver of the 7th Armoured Division described new engagement protocols. "We're teaching gunners to identify the turret ring in under 3 seconds from any angle. Range estimation drills focus on the 400 to 800 metre sweet spot where penetration probability is highest. And we're emphasising rapid fire. Get as many rounds on target as quickly as possible, because even if you don't penetrate, you might jam the traverse mechanism or damage the optics." But not everyone was celebrating. Major Thomas Crawford, a veteran tank commander who'd fought in North Africa, voiced concerns. "Gentlemen, we're teaching crews to engage German heavy armour head-on, to deliberately close range with tanks that outgun us. We're encouraging aggressiveness that gets men killed. Yes, the turret ring is weak, but a Panther can still kill you at 2,000 metres. A Tiger can penetrate your frontal armour while you're still trying to close to effective range. We're playing with fire here." The room fell silent. Crawford's point hit home. Improved tactics didn't eliminate the fundamental disadvantage of facing superior German armour. Patterson nodded respectfully. "You're absolutely right, Major. And we've had casualties from crews who got overconfident, who forgot that the turret ring weakness doesn't make German tanks harmless. That's why the revised doctrine emphasises that this is a tool, not a guarantee. Combined arms, proper positioning, numerical superiority, all of that still matters." "But here's what's changed," interjected a captain who'd been quiet until now. Captain Rodriguez, the Sherman commander who'd participated in the original test firing. "Before, when we saw a Panther, our doctrine was to run or call for support. We were conceding the battlefield to German armour. Now we have the option to fight. We don't have to fight every engagement, but we can if the tactical situation favours it. That psychological shift from helplessness to capability, that's worth something too." Crawford considered this. "You're saying it's about options?" "Exactly. Good commanders still avoid unfavourable engagements. But when you can't avoid it, when you're in contact and have to fight, now you have a methodology that gives you a chance. It's the difference between certain death and probable survival." The discussion shifted to training implementation. How do you rapidly disseminate new tactics to thousands of tank crews spread across a combat zone? The solution was multi-pronged. Simplified field manuals, single-page laminated guides that gunners could keep in their tanks, showed the turret ring from various angles with range and angle recommendations. More detailed technical manuals went to platoon and company commanders for tactical planning. Behind the lines, hastily organised training programs gave crews practice on captured German tanks. Gunners fired at actual Panthers and Tigers, learning to identify the turret ring quickly, to estimate range accurately, to adjust their aim point based on angle and distance. "We're also using gun camera footage," noted a training officer. "Every kill that involves turret ring targeting gets analysed. We're building a library of successful engagements that new crews can study. See what works, see what doesn't. Learn from other people's experiences instead of making the same mistakes." Lieutenant Morrison, Donovan's platoon commander, stood to share a ground-level perspective. "Sirs, if I may, the biggest change I've seen isn't tactical, it's psychological. 3 weeks ago my crews were terrified of German heavy armour. Now they're confident. Not cocky, but confident. They know what to do, they know where to aim, they know they have a fighting chance. That changes everything about how they perform in combat." A British colonel added, "We're seeing the same thing. Morale has improved markedly. Crews volunteer for patrols they would have avoided before. They're willing to press attacks instead of breaking contact at the first sign of German armour. The knowledge itself is powerful, but the psychological impact might be even more significant." But lurking beneath the optimism was a darker question, finally voiced by Hastings. "How long until the Germans figure this out?" The room sobered. Everyone knew the answer was probably soon, if it hadn't happened already. "German intelligence isn't stupid," Patterson said. They're examining every knocked-out tank, interviewing surviving crews, looking for patterns. Some engineer at Henschel or Mahn is probably already getting screamed at by Albert Speer about welding quality control. "So what do we do when they fix it?" someone asked. "We exploit it for all it's worth while we can," Patterson replied. "Every Panther we kill now is one we don't face later. Every crew that survives because of this knowledge is one more experienced crew we have for the push into Germany. And honestly, fixing this problem isn't simple for them. They have to retool production lines, implement new welding procedures, possibly retrofit tanks already in the field. That takes months, maybe longer, while they're simultaneously trying to increase production to replace losses." Hastings pulled out a folder marked Top Secret. "We've received intelligence from German prisoners and resistance sources. The raw industrial region is being bombed systematically. Factories are operating at reduced capacity, often using forced labour with minimal training. Quality control is suffering across all production, not just tanks. Even if they identify the welding problem, they may not be able to fix it while maintaining production volume. So their choice is fewer tanks with better welds or more tanks with the defect?" Rodriguez asked. "Essentially, yes, and given how desperate their situation is becoming, they'll probably choose quantity over quality, which means this vulnerability might persist longer than we initially expected." The conference concluded with action items: expanded training programs, updated field manuals, coordination with Allied air forces to target German tank factories and recovery facilities, and continuous intelligence gathering to identify when German production changes. But the real revolution was already happening in the field, in the mud and hedgerows of Normandy, where tank crews were learning that knowledge could be as powerful as armour. July 12, 1944. Near St. Lo. Sergeant Donovan's platoon had been in continuous combat for 4 days, supporting infantry advances through the nightmarish bocage terrain. Denver Dolly showed it. The paint was scorched, the armour was scarred with deflected hits, and the crew was running on coffee and adrenaline. They'd killed 3 Panthers in those 4 days. 3. Donovan still couldn't quite believe it. The third kill had been that morning, a Panther attempting to ambush them from a concealed position behind a hedgerow. Sullivan had spotted the distinctive barrel profile, identified the turret ring through a gap in the foliage, and put 2 rounds into it before the German gunner could fire. The Panther's turret had jammed, the crew bailed, and another kill was added to Denver Dolly's tally. "We're getting good at this," Sullivan had said afterward, almost surprised by his own competence. Now, late afternoon, they were in defensive positions waiting for infantry to clear the next village. Donovan used the lull to study the latest technical update, modifications to the targeting doctrine based on 3 weeks of combat experience. The document was fascinating. It included probability tables showing kill likelihood based on range, angle, and gun type. It had diagrams of turret rings from different German tank models, noting variations in weld quality. It even included a section on target priority, which part of the turret ring to aim for based on the tactical situation. "This is getting scientific," Walsh observed, reading over Donovan's shoulder. "Next they'll want us to calculate ballistic coefficients and wind drift." "If it keeps us alive, I'll calculate whatever they want," Rees said. The young loader had matured noticeably over the past weeks. Combat did that. Aged you fast or killed you young. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "All Charlie units, be advised. Intelligence reports heavy German armour moving up from the south, possibly a company of Panthers, maybe mixed with some Tigers. They're trying to reinforce St. Lo before we cut it off." Donovan felt the familiar pre-combat tension. A company meant 5 to 10 tanks. Heavy odds, even with their new knowledge. "Charlie 2-6 copies. What's our play? We hold the line here, work with the tank destroyers coming up from reserve. 2 platoons of M10s should be here in 10 minutes. We set up a kill zone, let them come to us." Donovan smiled grimly. 6 months ago, let them come to us would have been suicide. Now it was tactics. The M10 tank destroyers arrived as promised, fast, open-topped vehicles with powerful 3-inch guns. Their commander, a lieutenant named Torres, coordinated quickly with Morrison. My boys have been studying the turret ring doctrine, Torres said over the command net. We've got better penetration than your 70s. How about we work a crossfire? Your Shermans fix them from the front, my M10s hit them from the flanks. Music to my ears, Lieutenant. Let's show these Germans what happens when they roll into an ambush. They had 30 minutes to prepare, time to position tanks, clear fields of fire, coordinate range markers and engagement zones. Donovan positioned Denver Dolly behind a hedgerow with a clear view down a road where intelligence expected the Germans to advance. Sullivan, you see that church steeple at 800 metres? Got it, Sarge. That's our range marker. Anything that comes down that road between us and the church, you put 2 rounds into the turret ring, then reassess. Speed's more important than perfection. We want to jam them, suppress them, make them react to us instead of us reacting to them. Understood. The wait was the worst part. Donovan could hear the rumble of heavy engines in the distance, getting closer. Through his periscope, he caught movement. There, the distinctive, angular profile of a panther moving cautiously up the road. Then another, then 3 more. 5 panthers, no tigers visible, but that didn't mean they weren't there. Morrison's voice was steady. All units, weapons hold. Let them get into the kill zone. M10S, you engage on my command. Shermans, you engage when the M10S fire. Target turret rings, rapid fire, maximum aggression. The Panthers advanced slowly, suspiciously. Their commanders knew this was ambush country, but they couldn't see the hidden Shermans behind hedgerows, couldn't see the M10s positioned on the flanks. 3, 2, 1, execute. The world exploded into noise and fire. 4 M10s opened up simultaneously, their powerful 3-inch guns sending armour-piercing rounds screaming toward the Panthers' flanks. At the same time, 6 Shermans emerged from concealment, their 75mm guns barking. Donovan watched Sullivan work with mechanical precision. First round, turret ring of the lead Panther, range 650 metres. Hit. The Panther's turret jerked, started to traverse, stuck. Second round, same target. The round punched through the compromised weld and smoke poured from the stricken tank. All around them, the kill zone had become a nightmare for the German tank company. Caught in a crossfire, unable to bring their superior guns to bear effectively, the Panthers were dying. One Panther got its gun working, fired at an M10. The round missed by metres. The German gunner was rushed, panicked. The M10's return fire struck the Panther's turret ring from the side, the angle perfect. The Panther brewed up, flames shooting from the hatches. Another Panther tried to reverse, to escape the kill zone. Charlie 2-3 hit it twice in rapid succession, both rounds on the turret ring. The turret stopped moving, frozen in place, and the crew bailed out. In 90 seconds, it was over. 5 Panthers, 1 destroyed, 3 disabled with jammed turrets, 1 retreating with visible damage. 0 Allied losses. The radio net erupted with excited chatter before Morrison restored order. All units, cease fire, maintain positions. Infantry, move up and secure those disabled tanks. Good work, people. Textbook execution. Donovan slumped in his commander's seat, adrenaline draining away. They'd just engaged 5 Panthers, tanks that individually outgunned and out-armoured them, and won decisively. Not through luck, not through overwhelming numbers, but through knowledge and tactics. "Holy shit," Reese whispered. We just did that." Sullivan was already cleaning his gun sight, his hand steady despite the combat. "Told you I could hit the turret ring. Didn't I tell you?" "You told us," Donovan confirmed. "You definitely told us." That evening, examining the disabled Panthers, Donovan found exactly what the technical bulletins had described: stress cracks around the turret ring welds, compromised metal, hasty construction. One Panther had 2 of Sullivan's rounds lodged in the turret ring, both penetrations, both fatal to the crew inside. A German prisoner, captured from one of the disabled tanks, was being questioned by intelligence. Donovan overheard part of the conversation. "You kept hitting the same spot," the German said in halting English. "Every tank the same place. How did you know?" The intelligence officer smiled but didn't answer. But Donovan knew. They knew because someone had examined a broken tank and noticed a flaw, because engineers had tested it, because the information had been shared rapidly and effectively, because crews had trained and adapted. They knew because that's what you did in war. You found every advantage, exploited every weakness, and turned intelligence into survival. The tactical revolution was complete. What had started as one lieutenant's observation of weld defects had become doctrine, had been tested in battle, and had fundamentally changed how Allied armour fought. The Germans had built the best tanks in the world, but they'd built them too fast, under too much pressure, and now they were paying the price in burning Panthers and disabled Tigers. And the war ground on, now slightly more favourable to the men in Shermans who'd learned where to aim. July 25th, 1944. Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy. The sky over St. Lo turned black with bombers, 1,500 heavy bombers and 350 fighter bombers, dropping over 4,000 tons of high explosives in a carpet bombing operation designed to shatter German defences. The earth itself seemed to scream. Sergeant Donovan watched from Denver Dolly's commander's position, 2 kilometres behind the bombardment line, as the world ahead disappeared into a rolling wall of smoke and fire. Beside his Sherman sat 47 others from the 2nd Armoured Division, engines idling, crews tense with anticipation. This was it, the breakout. After 7 weeks of grinding through hedgerows, losing men to every field and farm, the Allies were finally going to punch through German lines and break into open country. "How long until we go?" Walsh asked from the driver's position. 30 minutes after the bombing stops, Donovan replied. "Then we roll and we don't stop until we hit Paris or run out of gas." Sullivan was quiet, checking and rechecking his gun sight. In the past 5 weeks, he'd knocked out 7 German tanks, 5 Panthers, 2 Panzer IVs. Every single kill had been a turret ring hit. The young gunner from Detroit had become one of the division's top tank killers, his name circulating in after-action reports as an example of the new doctrine's effectiveness. The bombing finally stopped, leaving an eerie silence broken only by secondary explosions and the crackle of fires. Then the artillery started, American 105mm and 155mm guns walking their fire forward, expanding the breach in German lines. Morrison's voice came over the radio, calm despite the enormity of what they were about to do. "All Charlie units, this is 2-6. We advance in column, 200-metre spacing, full speed once we clear the bombardment zone. Intelligence says German armour is disorganised but not destroyed. Expect contact with Panthers and possibly Tigers. You know what to do. Execute doctrine, trust your training, and let's show them what American armour can do." The column rolled forward into hell. The bombardment had transformed the landscape into something alien. Craters 10 metres wide, hedgerows vaporised, the earth churned into a lunar surface. They passed German positions that had simply ceased to exist, scattered with debris and bodies and the wreckage of defensive positions pulverised by American air power. But the Germans weren't finished. At 1420 hours, contact, a company of Panthers, survivors from a reserve Panzer division, had assembled in a tree line 3 kilometres beyond the bombardment zone. They'd taken casualties from the bombing but remained combat effective, and now they sat in defensive positions trying to stem the American breakthrough. The lead American tanks, a platoon from Baker Company, took fire immediately. One Sherman exploded, hit by a Panther's 75mm gun at over 1,000 metres. Another took a hit that disabled its track. But this wasn't the hedgerow fighting anymore. This was open ground, room to manoeuvre, and American numerical superiority could finally tell. "All units, deploy online," Morrison ordered. "Execute coordinated engagement. First wave targets turret rings, fixes them in place. Second wave flanks left and right. Go." 48 Shermans deployed from column into line formation, spreading across a 1,000-metre front. It was a sight to inspire terror in any defender. A wall of American armour advancing at 30 kilometres per hour, guns firing, coordinating like a well-oiled machine. Donovan designated targets over the company net. Charlie 2-6, engaging Panther at tree line left side. 2-3, take the centre. 2-4, right side. Sullivan was already locked on. Range 850 metres, moving target, slight angle, compensating. The Sherman rocked as the gun fired. Through the smoke, Donovan saw the tracer connect, direct hit on the Panther's turret ring. The enemy tank's turret jerked, trying to traverse toward this new threat, but something was wrong with the mechanism. It moved sluggishly, grinding. Hit again, Donovan ordered. Sullivan's second round struck within centimetres of the first. The Panther's turret stopped moving entirely, frozen in place, its gun pointing uselessly 30 degrees off target. To their left and right, other Shermans were executing the same tactic. Hit the turret ring, jam the traverse, turn a mobile gun platform into a stationary bunker. Then the flanking tanks, already racing wide on both sides, would hit them from angles where even the Panther's heavy armour couldn't save them. The German position disintegrated in minutes. 8 Panthers, 4 destroyed outright, 3 disabled with jammed turrets, 1 retreating with heavy damage. The American advance continued without significant delay. By evening, the 2nd Armoured Division had advanced 18 kilometres, a pace that would have been impossible during the hedgerow fighting. They'd engaged German armour 6 times, knocking out 23 tanks for the loss of 9 Shermans. The math that had once favoured the Germans was inverting. July 30th, 1944, near Avranches. The breakthrough was complete. American armour was pouring through the gap at Avranches, fanning out into Brittany and southern France. The German army in Normandy was collapsing, trying to retreat before being encircled. And everywhere German tanks tried to make a stand, American crews exploited their knowledge of the turret ring weakness. Corporal Sullivan kept a journal against regulations, but he did it anyway. His entry for July 30th was clinical, engagement number 11, 2 Tigers attempting to hold crossroads south of Avranches. Range 600 metres. First Tiger jammed on 3rd shot, destroyed on 5th. Second Tiger withdrew after observing first kill. No friendly casualties. The doctrine works. Every time, it works. The Germans must know by now what we're doing, but they can't fix it in the field. Their best tanks are death traps because someone rushed the welding. He was right. German intelligence had figured out the pattern weeks ago. Damaged tanks recovered by German recovery crews showed consistent damage to turret rings. Surviving crews reported that American gunners were specifically targeting that area. Reports flooded back to German tank factories and Albert Speer's armament ministry. But fixing the problem was nearly impossible under current conditions. Hauptmann Werner Schulze, a German tank officer captured near Mortain, explained it during interrogation. The American intelligence officer who questioned him was Captain William Bradford, the same history professor who'd lectured German POWs about democracy, now temporarily reassigned to tactical intelligence. We knew about the welding defects, Schulze admitted in fluent English. Our own engineers identified the problem in May. But what could we do? The factories are being bombed constantly. Skilled welders are either dead, conscripted into the infantry, or working 16-hour shifts. We're using forced labour, Russian prisoners, French conscripts, people with minimal training trying to weld armour plate that requires expert technique. So production quality suffers, Bradford said. Production quality is a joke, Schulze replied bitterly. I commanded Panthers for 8 months. Every tank I received had problems. Rushed welds, improper heat treatment, substandard parts. But we needed the tanks, needed them desperately, so we took what we got and tried to fight with them. He paused. When did you figure out the turret ring weakness? Mid-June, damaged tank analysis. Schulze laughed without humour. We gave you 3 weeks. 3 weeks where you knew our weakness and we couldn't fix it. That's an eternity in war. How many of our tanks did you kill in those 3 weeks? Bradford checked a report. Documented kills specifically attributable to turret ring targeting, 147 Panthers, 32 Tigers, 63 Panzer IVs, plus unknown numbers of mission kills, disabled but not destroyed. The German captain's face went pale. 242 tanks, because of welding defects, because we were in too much of a hurry. He looked at Bradford. You know what's ironic? Our tanks were better than yours, better armour, better guns, better engineering. But we lost because we couldn't build them properly, lost because we valued speed over quality." "There's a lesson there," Bradford said quietly. "Yes, the lesson is that perfection achieved slowly loses to good enough achieved quickly." Schulze shook his head. "Your Shermans are adequate tanks. Not great, not terrible, just adequate. But you build thousands of them with consistent quality and you train your crews to exploit our weaknesses. That's how you win wars." August 8, 1944. The Falaise Pocket. The German 7th Army was trapped. American forces from the south, British and Canadian forces from the north, closing a pocket around tens of thousands of German soldiers. It was the beginning of the end for German forces in France, and caught in the pocket were the remnants of multiple panzer divisions, hundreds of tanks trying to break out before the trap closed completely. The killing was systematic and brutal. At a place called Hill 262, Polish armoured units using the turret ring doctrine destroyed 18 Panthers in a single afternoon. The Germans were trying to break through to escape, throwing armour forward in desperate attacks. But the Poles had good positions, clear fields of fire, and knowledge of exactly where to aim. Near Chambois, American tank destroyers caught a column of retreating German armour. 23 Panthers, 7 Tigers, all trying to escape through a narrow gap. The M10 and M18 tank destroyers picked them off methodically. Turret ring shots from concealed positions, killing or disabling vehicles that blocked the road, creating a traffic jam of burning metal that trapped the rest. "It's not war anymore," one American tank destroyer commander reported. "It's execution. They're trapped, desperate, and we know exactly how to kill them." Donovan's platoon was part of the forces closing the southern edge of the pocket. In 5 days of continuous combat, they destroyed 14 German tanks, all Panthers or Tigers, all killed by targeting the turret ring. Denver Dolly was scarred, shumped and battered but still functional. The crew was exhausted, running on adrenaline and the knowledge that the end was in sight. Not the end of the war, that was still far off, but the end of the Normandy campaign, the end of this particular hell. On August 12th, they encountered what would be their last German tank in Normandy, a Tiger sitting alone on a hilltop, out of fuel or broken down. Its crew had abandoned it, but the massive tank sat like a monument to German armoured might, 56 tons of the most feared fighting vehicle on Earth. "Should we destroy it?" Sullivan asked. Donovan studied the Tiger through his periscope. How many Sherman crews had died to these monsters? How many times had he felt gut-wrenching fear at the sight of that distinctive, boxy hull? "No," he decided. "Let the infantry deal with it. We're out of the tank-killing business for today." But Sullivan was already examining the turret ring through his sight, automatically assessing the shot. "Range 400 metres. Stationary target. I could put 3 rounds through that weld in 10 seconds. "I know you could, Tommy, but let's save our ammunition for live targets." They drove past the abandoned Tiger, leaving it for recovery crews or demolition teams. It sat there, silent and impotent, a symbol of what had gone wrong for Germany. Magnificent engineering, rushed production, and fatal flaws that knowledge could exploit. August 20th, 1944. After action analysis, 1st Army Headquarters. The Normandy campaign was over. The Germans were in full retreat toward the Seine, the Allied breakout was complete, and the race to Paris was on. Lieutenant Murphy, whose examination of a broken Tiger had started everything, stood before a room full of senior officers presenting final statistics. Total German armour losses in Normandy, approximately 1,500 tanks and assault guns. Of these, we can definitively attribute 344 kills to turret ring targeting. An additional 290 mission kills, disabled vehicles, also resulted from this tactic. That's 634 German tanks rendered combat ineffective, specifically because we exploited the welding defect. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. But the impact goes beyond raw numbers. The psychological effect on German crews was significant. Prisoners report that tank commanders were increasingly reluctant to engage American armour, knowing that even head-on encounters could be fatal. The invincibility of the Panther and Tiger was shattered. A general in the back raised his hand. What's the current status of the defect? Are the Germans fixing it? Major Hastings fielded this question. Intelligence indicates that new production from German factories shows improved welding quality. They've implemented stricter quality control, better training for welders and modified production procedures. However, this comes at a cost. Production rates have dropped approximately 15%. They're choosing quality over quantity now, but it may be too late. What about retrofitting existing vehicles? Limited. Properly fixing the turret ring welds would require removing the turret, re-welding the entire assembly with proper heat treatment, essentially rebuilding the tank. Most German armour units don't have the facilities or time for that kind of work. They're aware of the weakness but can't do much about it in the field. The general nodded. So we continue to exploit it as long as we can. Exactly, sir. We estimate that 60 to 70% of German heavy armour currently in service still has the defect. That's hundreds of tanks on the Eastern Front, in Italy, in France. Every one of them is vulnerable to crews who know where to aim. The briefing continued with lessons learned, recommended doctrinal changes, and plans for sharing the intelligence with Soviet forces, though that was politically complicated. But the real story was in what hadn't been said. How a single technical flaw, born from Germany's desperate rush to produce weapons faster than they could be destroyed, had helped tip the balance in armoured warfare. How knowledge, simple knowledge of where to aim, could overcome material disadvantage. The Germans had built better tanks, but better didn't matter if they couldn't build them well. September 1st, 1944. Somewhere in Belgium. Denver Dolly rolled through a liberated Belgian town, flowers being thrown by cheering civilians, Sullivan grinning like a kid at the attention. The crew had survived Normandy. Against odds that should have killed them, they'd survived. Donovan sat in his commander's cupola, reading a letter from his wife. She was proud of him, worried about him, counting the days until he came home. He was counting those days too. How many tanks you think we killed total, Sarge? Reese asked. Donovan thought about it. 17 confirmed, maybe 3 or 4 more that we shared credit for. Not bad for a Sherman crew. Not bad, we're fucking aces, Walsh called from the driver's position. Language, Donovan said automatically, but he was smiling. Sullivan was cleaning his gun sight, his eternal ritual. You know what's funny? I was a machinist before the war. I worked on precision instruments, measured things to thousandths of an inch, thought that was what mattered. Precision, perfection. And now, Donovan asked, now I know that good enough, done fast and done right where it counts, beats perfect every time. Those Germans spent years designing the perfect tank. We spent a few weeks figuring out where it broke and how to kill it. Guess which approach won? It was a simple observation, but it captured something fundamental about the war, about the difference between German and Allied approaches, about why knowledge could triumph over engineering. Ahead lay more fighting, the Siegfried Line, the Battle of the Bulge, the final push into Germany itself. More tanks to kill, more dangers to face, more days of fear and combat, and hoping to survive. But Denver Dolly's crew would face it with something German tank crews didn't have, the knowledge of exactly where their enemy was weakest, and the training to exploit it. One broken tank, examined by a curious lieutenant, had revealed a secret that changed everything. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily and surely, turning the tide one turret ring at a time, one jammed Travis mechanism at a time, one penetrating hit at a time. The war ground on. But now at least, the men in Sherman's knew how to fight back, and that made all the difference. April 15th, 1945. Outside Nuremberg, Germany. The war was ending. Everyone could feel it. In the desperate, disorganized German resistance. In the streams of refugees clogging the roads. In the burned-out factories and demolished cities. The Third Reich was in its death throes, and the Allied advance had become less a battle than a pursuit. Sergeant Donovan, now Staff Sergeant Donovan, after a promotion that had come through in January, sat on the engine deck of Denver Dolly and watched smoke rise from the city of Nuremberg. American artillery was systematically reducing the last pockets of resistance. Within days, maybe hours, the city would fall. He thought about the fact that somewhere in this city, in factories that were now rubble, panthers had been built. The same panthers his crew had learned to kill. There was a certain poetic justice in that. "Sarge, you need to see this," Sullivan called from the ground. Donovan climbed down to find his gunner standing next to a panther that had been abandoned by the roadside, out of fuel probably, or mechanically broken. The crew had torched it before fleeing, but the fire had gone out before causing catastrophic damage. Sullivan was examining the turret ring with the practiced eye of a man who'd spent 10 months shooting at exactly this spot. "Look at this," he said, pointing. Donovan looked. The welds were different, cleaner, more professional, multiple passes with proper technique, visible even to his untrained eye. The heat-affected zone was minimal, the metal properly treated. "They fixed it," Sullivan said. "Finally fixed the welding problem. This tank was probably built in late 44, maybe early 45. Too late to matter, but they fixed it." "Would it have made a difference," Donovan asked, "if they'd been building them like this from the start?" Sullivan considered the question seriously. "Maybe. We'd have lost more Shermans for sure, but we'd have adapted in other ways. Better tactics, more tank destroyers, more reliance on air support. The turret ring weakness gave us an edge, but it wasn't the only reason we won." He was right, Donovan knew. The war had been decided by industrial capacity, by logistics, by numbers and resources that Germany simply couldn't match. The turret ring flaw had just made the inevitable come faster, at lower cost in Allied lives. But those lives mattered. Every Sherman crew that survived because they knew where to aim, every tank that didn't brew up because its gunner put a round through a compromised weld instead of bouncing it off solid armour. Those were real people who went home instead of dying in a Norman field or a Belgian forest. 23, Sullivan said quietly. "What?" 23 German tanks I killed. Well, we killed. I just pulled the trigger. 23 times I aimed at that turret ring and the doctrine worked. 23 times we should have died but didn't, because some lieutenant noticed bad welds on a captured Tiger. Donovan clapped his gunner on the shoulder. "And now you get to go home to Detroit and marry that girl and open your garage. That's what those 23 tanks bought you, a future." They walked back to Denver Dolly, leaving the abandoned Panther behind. The Sherman was scarred and battered, her paint burned off in places, her armour dented from deflected rounds. But she'd carried them from Normandy to the heart of Germany. How many kilometres? Donovan had lost count. How many battles? Too many. But they'd survived, all of them. Donovan, Sullivan, Walsh, Rees. An entire crew that had made it through 10 months of the most intense armoured combat in history. That was rare enough to be almost miraculous. May 8th, 1945. VE Day. American Occupation Zone, Germany. The war in Europe was over. Official, final, complete. Germany had surrendered unconditionally, and across the Allied world, people celebrated. Lieutenant Murphy, now Captain Murphy after his own promotion, sat in a tent at Allied headquarters, compiling final statistics. It was bureaucratic work, the kind of tedious data analysis that would inform future doctrine and training, but had no immediate impact on anything. Still, someone had to do it, and the numbers told a story worth documenting. Final report: exploitation of structural weaknesses in German armoured vehicles, June 1944 to May 1945. Total confirmed kills attributed to turret ring targeting: 1,347 mission kills, disabled but not destroyed. 892 total German armour, rendered combat ineffective through exploitation of welding defects. 2,239 Allied armour losses in engagements where turret ring doctrine was employed. 634 tanks. Estimated Allied armour losses if conventional doctrine had been used: 2,100 to 2,500 tanks, based on pre-June 1944 loss ratios. Estimated Allied personnel saved: 3,500 to 4,200. Murphy stared at that last number: 3,500 to 4,200 men who would have died if they hadn't figured out the turret ring weakness. 3,000 lives saved because he'd noticed stress cracks on a weld seam and been curious enough to investigate. Major Hastings entered the tent carrying 2 cups of coffee. Finishing the report? Just about. The numbers are staggering when you add them all up. They are, though I suspect they undercount the real impact. We're only measuring direct kills. We're not measuring the psychological impact. German tank commanders who hesitated to engage because they knew they were vulnerable. We're not measuring the tactical advantages that knowledge gave our forces. We're not measuring how many operations succeeded because German armour couldn't hold a position. How do you measure those things? Murphy asked. You don't. You just acknowledge that the ripple effects were probably larger than the direct effects. Hastings sipped his coffee. I've been thinking about what this teaches us, about warfare, about engineering, about the interaction between design and production. And the Germans tried to achieve victory through superior technology. They designed better tanks, better aircraft, better weapons. But superior design means nothing if you can't produce it in quantity, with consistent quality, under combat conditions. They tried to achieve perfection and ended up with flawed execution. Murphy nodded. While we accepted good enough and focused on making it work. Exactly. The Sherman wasn't the best tank in the war, but it was good enough, and we built tens of thousands of them, with consistent quality, with reliable logistics to keep them running. That's how you win industrial wars. Not with wonder weapons, but with reliable, mass-produced equipment and crews trained to use it effectively. You're writing a book about this, aren't you? Murphy asked, smiling. Maybe after I get back to teaching. The Tyranny of Perfection, How German Engineering Lost World War II. Catchy title, don't you think? They sat in companionable silence, drinking bad army coffee and thinking about all they'd learned. The war was over, but the lessons would echo for decades. June 20th, 1945, 1 year after the turret ring doctrine was implemented, Technical Sergeant Chen, who'd analysed the metallurgy of the first Panther they'd examined, was part of a technical intelligence team examining captured German tank factories. The devastation was total. Allied bombing had reduced the great industrial complexes to rubble, but enough remained to understand how they'd operated. Walking through the ruins of the Mann facility in Nuremberg, Chen found evidence of what they'd suspected: desperate, rushed production under impossible conditions. Welding stations showed signs of hasty work, inadequate preheating equipment, insufficient time for proper multi-pass welding, lack of post-weld heat treatment facilities. The factory had been set up to prioritise speed over quality because Germany had been hemorrhaging tanks faster than they could produce them. A German engineer who'd worked at the facility, now employed by the occupation authorities to help document war production, confirmed it. We knew the welds were substandard, the engineer said in careful English. We reported it to Speer's ministry in April 1944, but the directive came back: maintain production rates at all costs. Every week of delay meant tanks that wouldn't reach the front, meant cities bombed without protection, meant Soviet armies advancing unopposed. So you chose quantity over quality, Chen said. We chose survival, or tried to. Obviously, it didn't work. The engineer looked around the destroyed factory. Your analysis was correct, by the way. The heat-affected zones, the crystalline structure, the stress fractures. I read the captured technical bulletin. Very thorough work. You understood our failures better than we did. We had motivation to understand them. Those failures were killing us. And once you understood them, you killed us instead. Efficient, ruthless, very American. There was no bitterness in the engineer's voice, just resignation. We tried to beat you with superior technology. You beat us with superior intelligence, both kinds. Technical intelligence that identified our weaknesses and organisational intelligence that rapidly disseminated that knowledge to frontline forces. That's the war in microcosm. Chen thought about that. It was true in a way. The Allies hadn't won because they built better tanks. They'd won because they built enough tanks, maintained them properly, and trained crews to exploit enemy weaknesses rather than relying on technological superiority. "What will you do now?" Chen asked the German engineer. "Help rebuild, I suppose. Help document what went wrong so future generations don't repeat our mistakes. Help create something better than what was destroyed." He paused. "And never rush a weld again, no matter who's ordering me to work faster." September 1945, Fort Knox, Kentucky. The Armoured School. The war was over, but the Army was already looking forward to the next one. Lessons learned in Europe and the Pacific were being compiled into new doctrine, new training programs, new approaches to armoured warfare. Captain Rodriguez, the Sherman commander who'd participated in the original test firing of the turret ring doctrine, was now an instructor at the Armoured School. His class was full of young officers who'd missed the war, eager to learn from those who'd fought it. The turret ring doctrine represents a fundamental principle of modern warfare, Rodriguez told his students. Intelligence can overcome material disadvantage. Knowledge of enemy weaknesses can be as valuable as superior firepower. But, and this is critical, that knowledge is useless unless it's rapidly disseminated and effectively employed. He showed them the progression. Murphy's initial observation in June 1944, Chen's metallurgical analysis, the test firings, the simplified field manuals, the training programs, the combat validation, each step building on the previous, each step moving faster than the enemy could respond. From first observation to widespread implementation took less than 2 weeks, Rodriguez explained. That's the advantage of a flexible, decentralized command structure. Local initiative, rapid information sharing, trust in junior officers to make decisions. The Germans had better tanks, but they had a rigid command structure that couldn't adapt quickly. A student raised his hand. "Sir, would this doctrine work against Soviet tanks, in case the next war is against Russia?" Rodriguez paused. It was 1945. The Soviets were still allies, but already there were tensions. Already people were thinking about future conflicts. The specific doctrine, targeting turret rings, might not apply to Soviet designs. Their tanks use different construction methods. But the principle applies universally. Study your enemy, identify weaknesses, train to exploit them, adapt faster than they can respond. That works against any opponent. The class ended with a film, gun camera footage from actual combat, showing turret ring hits on Panthers and Tigers, showing what worked and what didn't. The students watched in silence, seeing the doctrine they'd been studying applied under fire, watching American tank crews survive encounters that should have killed them. "Remember," Rodriguez said as they filed out, "those crews survived because someone noticed a flaw, because engineers analysed it, because that knowledge was shared effectively." Never underestimate the power of information. October 1945, Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. The captured German tanks, Panthers, Tigers, Panzer IVs, sat in rows at the proving ground, awaiting systematic testing and analysis. The war was over, but understanding how to defeat these machines remained relevant. The Soviets had captured hundreds of German tanks, were probably studying them, possibly even continuing production of some models. Major Hastings walked among them, examining the welds that had become his obsession. Even now, months after the war ended, he found the metallurgical failure fascinating. A team of civilian engineers from the automotive industry was touring the facility, learning from military research that might apply to peacetime production. One of them, a young engineer from Ford, stopped beside Hastings. "These welds are terrible," the engineer observed, examining a Panther's turret ring. "Any quality control inspector would have rejected these pieces." "They did," Hastings replied. "German engineers identified the problem, but they were overruled by production demands." So they knowingly produced defective tanks? They knowingly produced flawed tanks because flawed tanks were better than no tanks, or so they thought. As it turned out, flawed tanks that could be systematically killed by enemies who knew their weakness were worse than fewer tanks with no weakness. The Ford engineer made notes. "There's a lesson here for peacetime production. Never sacrifice quality for speed unless you're absolutely certain the speed matters more than the quality. And in competitive markets, quality usually matters more." In war too, apparently, Hastings said. November 1945, Cleveland, Ohio. Former Corporal Tommy Sullivan stood in front of a small garage, looking up at the sign. Sullivan and Sons Auto Repair. His father had owned it before the war. Now Tommy was home, ready to take over, ready to build something instead of destroying things. His fiancée, Marie, stood beside him. "You're really home, really actually home, really actually home," he confirmed. Inside, the tools were familiar. Precision instruments, measuring devices, welding equipment. Sullivan ran his hand over the welding torch, thinking about hasty welds on German armour, thinking about how rushing a job could cost lives. "I'm going to do things right," he said aloud. "Every job, done properly, no cutting corners. I've seen what happens when you rush important work." Marie didn't fully understand. How could she when she hadn't been there? But she nodded supportively. "Whatever you think is best." That night, Sullivan sat down and wrote a letter to Sergeant Donovan, now back in Texas and working in his family's hardware store. "Mike, made it home safe. Garage is mine now. Marie and I are getting married in June. You better be there. I think about the crew sometimes, about Denver Dolly and all those tanks we killed. 23 confirmed, you kept count. 23 times we should have died, but didn't. I'm a welder now, among other things. And every time I strike an arc, I think about those German welders who rushed their work, who compromised quality for speed, who never imagined that their hasty welds would be the death of the crews depending on them. I don't rush welds, Mike, not ever. People tell me I'm too slow, too careful. I tell them, I've seen what happens when welding is done wrong. They think I'm talking about structural failures or product defects. I don't correct them. But you'd understand. Every weld I make properly is a small monument to the fact that we survived when we shouldn't have, that someone noticed bad welds and we learned to exploit them, and we came home when so many didn't. See you in June." Tommy, December 1945. The Pentagon, Washington, D.C. The final report on armoured operations in the European theatre was being compiled, a massive document that would influence American tank design and doctrine for decades. Lieutenant Murphy, now on staff at the Pentagon before his planned return to civilian life, wrote the section on intelligence exploitation. The conclusion was simple. In modern warfare, the side that better integrates intelligence into tactical operations will have a decisive advantage regardless of material balance. The turret ring doctrine became a case study taught at every military academy, not because it represented some brilliant tactical innovation, it was just aim here instead of there, but because it represented a system working correctly: observation, analysis, testing, rapid dissemination, effective implementation, and continuous improvement based on combat feedback. That system, that ability to learn and adapt faster than the enemy, had been worth more than superior armour or bigger guns. Murphy's final words in the report. The German Panther was arguably the best tank of World War II from a design perspective, but it lost to the American Sherman, not because the Sherman was better designed, but because the American system was better at identifying weaknesses, disseminating information, and training forces to exploit those weaknesses. Future conflicts will be won not by those with the best technology, but by those who best leverage technology, intelligence, and adaptability into effective action. June 1946, 1 year after the war ended. The crew of Denver Dolly gathered for Sullivan's wedding in Detroit. They hadn't seen each other since demobilization, but the bond remained, forged in fire, tempered by solvable, unbreakable, despite distance. Donovan gave a toast at the reception. To Tommy Sullivan, best damn gunner in the European theatre, may his welds in peacetime be as deadly accurate as his shooting was in war. Everyone laughed, though the civilians present didn't understand why it was funny. Later, the crew stood together outside, smoking and talking quietly. "You ever think about it?" Reese asked. He'd grown up, no longer the 19-year-old kid, but a young man with a future. "About how close we came, how many times we should have died." "Every day," Walsh admitted. "Then I stopped thinking about it because I've got crops to plant and a farm to run, and thinking about the war doesn't help with any of that." "I think about the ones who didn't make it," Donovan said. "Miller's crew. The Baker Company boys who got hit before we figured out the turret ring thing. all the guys who died because they were fighting with incomplete information. Sullivan looked at his friends, his crew, his brothers. We were lucky. Lucky that Murphy noticed the welds. Lucky that smart guys like Hastings and Chen figured out the weakness. Lucky that the army got the information to us fast enough to matter. Lucky that I could shoot straight. Just lucky. Luck and skill, Donovan corrected. Don't sell yourself short. You hit what you aimed at. That's skill, not luck. Either way, we made it. All of us. That's what matters. They stood in silence, each lost in memories of a war that was over, but would never really end. Not for them. The statistics would say that exploiting the turret ring weakness had killed 1,347 German tanks and saved thousands of Allied lives. But for these 4 men, the statistics reduced to something simpler. They'd survived because someone had noticed bad welds and they'd learned where to aim. One broken tank, examined on a June morning in Normandy, had changed everything. Not the course of the war. Industrial might and Russian armies would have achieved that regardless. But it had changed the mathematics of survival for tank crews who'd been given knowledge to turn fear into hope, defensive tactics into offensive capability, certain death into fighting chance. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. They went back inside to celebrate new beginnings, leaving the war behind where it belonged, in memory, honoured but not dwelling, remembered but not defining. The war was over. They had survived. And the broken tank that had revealed its secrets to a curious lieutenant had given them the gift of a future.